I'm Commander Margaret Richmond, 35 years old, and I built my career in the Navy through 15 years of deployments, intelligence work, and sacrifices most people never see. For years, I carried my family too, sending money home, trying to keep us connected even when they dismissed my service. But when a 4:30 a.m. Pentagon call revealed my father's name on a classified list of traitors, I had to make a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been betrayed by the very person you trusted most? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I tell you exactly what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your worth. What came next might shock you. At 4:30 a.m., my phone cut through the darkness with the kind of ring that makes your stomach drop. Pentagon dispatch. Emergency briefing. Report immediately. I'd been through enough midnight calls to know the drill, but this one felt different. The voice on the other end was clipped, urgent in a way that suggested something had gone very wrong. I threw on my dress blues in the pre-dawn quiet of my Arlington apartment, muscle memory guiding me through the routine while my mind raced through possibilities. Terrorist attack? Cyber breach? Foreign incursion? The drive to the Pentagon was eerily quiet, DC still sleeping while I navigated empty streets under streetlights that seemed too bright. My security clearance got me through the checkpoints without delay, but I noticed the extra guards, the heightened alertness in their eyes. Whatever this was, it was big. General Donovan was waiting in conference room C7, the kind of sterile briefing room where careers are made and broken. He looked like he'd been awake for hours, his usually immaculate uniform showing the wrinkles of a man who'd been pacing. Coffee cups littered the table, and classified folders sat in neat stacks beside laptops humming with encrypted data feeds. "Commander Richmond," he said without preamble. "Sit down." I took my seat, noting the other faces around the table. Counterintelligence. Internal affairs. People who dealt with the worst kinds of betrayal. My pulse quickened. "We've uncovered a network," General Donovan began, his voice steady but grim. "High-level intelligence leaks spanning the last 18 months. Financial records, communication intercepts, witness testimony. We know who they are." He reached for a manila folder marked with red classification stamps. The kind that could end careers or start wars. But even as I focused on the briefing, my mind drifted to the weekend just past. Sunday dinner at my parents' house in McLean, where my father had seemed more distracted than usual. He'd barely acknowledged my promotion to commander, the result of 15 years climbing the ranks, earning respect through deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, through long nights analyzing threat assessments and coordinating with allied forces. "That's nice, Margaret," he'd said, not looking up from his phone. "Government work keeps you busy, I'm sure." Government work. As if my service was some bureaucratic job instead of the oath I'd taken to defend the Constitution. As if the nights I'd spent in Kandahar coordinating supply routes, or the months I'd worked 18-hour days tracking weapons shipments, were just paper pushing. My mother had tried to smooth it over, as she always did. "Your father's just tired, honey. The business has been demanding." The business. For the past 2 years, my father's consulting firm had been landing bigger contracts, moving into what he vaguely described as international logistics. New clients with names I didn't recognize, trips to places he wouldn't specify. When I'd asked about it over Christmas, he'd waved me off. "Nothing you'd understand, Margaret. Different world from your military protocols." The dismissiveness had stung, but it wasn't new. Since I'd made captain, then major, then commander, he'd grown increasingly distant. Family gatherings became exercises in tension, with him making subtle digs about following orders and being a government drone. My brother Josh would shift uncomfortably in his chair, while my mother would change the subject to safer ground. "Your father's proud of you," she'd assured me privately. "He just doesn't know how to show it." But I'd started to wonder if that was true. The man who'd once taken me camping in Shenandoah, who'd taught me to shoot and told me stories about his own service in Vietnam, seemed to have been replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone who looked at my uniform with something approaching contempt. The money bothered me too. The house renovations that had appeared without explanation. the new Mercedes in the driveway, the expensive dinners at restaurants where the waiters knew him by name. When I'd mentioned it to Josh, he'd shrugged. Dad's business is doing well. Maybe you should be happy for him instead of suspicious. Suspicious. The word had stung because it was accurate. My training had taught me to notice patterns, to trust my instincts when something didn't add up. And my father's sudden prosperity, combined with his growing hostility toward my career, created a picture I didn't want to examine too closely. Last month, I'd stopped by unannounced and found him in his home office, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Russian. He'd ended the call abruptly when he saw me, claiming it was a business associate from overseas. But the way he'd closed his laptop, the defensive set of his shoulders, told a different story. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Margaret. Some of us have to work in the real world, not just take orders and follow procedures." The real world. As if the intelligence reports I analyzed daily, the threats I helped neutralize, the American lives protected by the work I did, existed in some fantasy realm. As if my 2 tours overseas had been elaborate games instead of the deadly serious business of national defense. General Donovan was still talking, outlining the scope of the investigation, the months of surveillance and financial tracking that had led to this moment. But I was thinking about my father's new friends, the men in expensive suits who'd started appearing at family gatherings. Men with accents I couldn't place and business cards from companies that seemed to exist only on paper. "Margaret, you should meet Victor," my father had said at my birthday dinner 6 months ago. "He's helping expand our international reach." Victor had smiled and shaken my hand, his grip lingering a moment too long. "Commander Richmond. Your father speaks of you often. Such an impressive career in government service." The way he'd said it, with that slight pause and knowing smile, had made my skin crawl. But when I'd mentioned it to my father later, he'd accused me of being paranoid. "Not everyone who works internationally is a spy, Margaret. Maybe your job is making you see threats where none exist." Now, sitting in this briefing room surrounded by the highest levels of military intelligence, I wondered if my instincts had been right all along. If the distance between my father and me had grown not because of his inability to understand my career, but because of choices he'd made that put us on opposite sides of everything I'd sworn to protect. General Donovan reached for that classified folder again, and I felt my world about to shift in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Every person on this list leaked secrets to the enemy. General Donovan's words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. The folder sat between us on the polished conference table, its red classification stamps seeming to pulse under the fluorescent lights. My hand moved toward it without conscious thought, trained by years of military discipline to process intelligence regardless of personal cost. The first page was a summary sheet, dense with details about financial transfers, communication intercepts, and surveillance photographs. Names, dates, amounts. A web of betrayal that stretched across months of careful investigation. My eyes scanned the technical language, the bureaucratic precision of treason documented in official terminology. Then I turned the page. Jack Richmond. My father's name, typed in clean black letters at the top of a detailed dossier. Below it, his photograph from his consulting firm's website, professionally lit and smiling. The same smile he'd worn at Sunday dinners while deflecting questions about his work, while dismissing my career as irrelevant government service. The folder slipped from my fingers. Actually slipped, like I was a rookie analyst seeing her first classified briefing instead of a commander with 15 years of handling sensitive intelligence. The pages scattered across the table, revealing more names, more photographs, more evidence of a network I'd never imagined. "Commander Richmond?" General Donovan's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" I stared at my father's file. Bank records showing transfers from shell companies with addresses in Moscow and Beijing. Communication logs revealing encrypted conversations with known intelligence operatives. Surveillance photographs of him meeting with men I'd seen at family gatherings, men whose business cards now made terrible sense. Victor. The man with the knowing smile and lingering handshake. Not just an international business partner, but a Russian intelligence handler. The conversations I'd overheard, the defensive way my father had ended phone calls when I walked into his office, the dismissive comments about my government work, all of it crystallized into a picture so clear I wondered how I'd missed it. How long? I managed to ask. 18 months of confirmed activity. Possibly longer. General Donovan leaned forward, his expression carefully neutral. Commander, I need you to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. These aren't casual intelligence sales. This network has compromised operational security for 3 active missions, caused the deaths of 2 assets overseas, and exposed classified weapon systems that took decades to develop. 2 assets overseas. People who'd trusted American intelligence, who'd risked everything to work with us, were dead because my father had sold their identities for money. The weight of it pressed against my chest like a physical force. What kind of information? I heard myself ask. The general's aide, a lieutenant colonel I didn't recognize, opened another folder. Troop movements in Syria. CIA asset networks in Eastern Europe. Naval communication protocols. Advanced missile defense specifications. He paused, studying my face. Intelligence that would require high-level security clearance to access. Which my father didn't have. But I did. The realization hit like cold water. He'd been mining me for information. The casual questions about my work, the attempts to draw me into conversations about current operations, the way he'd probe for details about my assignments. I'd thought it was awkward attempts at connection. Instead, it had been systematic intelligence gathering. Christmas dinner, I said aloud, remembering. He asked about the new base in Romania. Said he was curious about logistics, about how we coordinate with NATO allies. General Donovan nodded grimly. 3 days after that conversation, Romanian security services intercepted communications about the base's defensive capabilities. Information that hadn't been shared through official channels. The room was spinning. Not literally, but the careful architecture of my life, the separation between family and service, between personal loyalty and professional duty, was collapsing into rubble. My father hadn't just betrayed his country. He'd used me as an unwitting source, exploiting the trust between father and daughter to gather intelligence for foreign enemies. Does he know? I asked. That you've identified him? Not yet. We've maintained operational security throughout the investigation. As far as the network knows, they're still undetected. General Donovan studied my face carefully. Commander, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Of course he did. I was compromised by association, a security risk who'd unknowingly passed classified information to a traitor. My career, my clearance, my entire professional identity was now suspect. Every promotion I'd earned, every mission I'd supported, would be re-examined through the lens of potential compromise. I understand, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Have you discussed your current assignment with your father? No. The word came quickly, defensively. Then I forced myself to think harder. Not directly. He knows I work in intelligence analysis. He's made comments about deployment schedules, asked general questions about overseas operations. When was your last conversation about your work? 2 weeks ago. Sunday dinner. He asked about morale among the troops, whether we were getting adequate support from Washington. I told him I couldn't discuss specifics. The aide was taking notes, documenting every detail that might help them understand the extent of the damage. I realized I was under investigation now, my own loyalty questioned, because of blood ties to a man who'd sold American secrets to our enemies. General Donovan closed the folder with my father's photograph. Commander, I want to be clear about your situation. You're not under suspicion. Your record speaks to your integrity and dedication. But we need your complete cooperation in understanding how information may have been compromised. Complete cooperation. Which meant helping them build the case against my father. Providing details about our conversations, our family interactions, anything that might help them understand the scope of his betrayal. I was being asked to choose between my oath as an officer and my loyalty as a daughter. Except it wasn't really a choice. Not when 2 people were dead because of information my father had sold. Not when American operations had been compromised and lives put at risk. My oath had been clear from the day I raised my right hand, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Even when the enemy was the man who'd taught me to salute the flag. Before my father became a traitor, he was the man who taught me what integrity looked like. I was 8 years old, camping in Shenandoah National Park, when he first explained the concept of duty. We'd hiked 4 miles to reach our campsite, my small legs burning with effort while he carried both our packs without complaint. That night, as we sat around the fire watching sparks drift toward the stars, he'd pointed to his old army compass. "That needle always points north, Margaret. Doesn't matter if it's stormy or clear, day or night. It knows where it belongs." He looked at me across the flames, his face serious in the flickering light. "People need to be like that compass. Find your true north and hold to it, no matter what." His true north, he'd told me then, was service. Country first, family second, self last. The same principles he'd carried through 2 tours in Vietnam, the same values that had shaped my childhood understanding of what it meant to be an American. "Your dad's a hero," my mother used to say when explaining his long absences during my elementary school years. He'd worked for defense contractors then, helping design communication systems for the military. Classified work that took him to secure facilities around the country, work that mattered in ways he couldn't fully explain to a child. But he'd tried to explain it anyway, in ways that made sense to my young mind. America was the good guys, he'd said. We protected people who couldn't protect themselves. We stood between freedom and the forces that wanted to destroy it. His work, my potential future work, was part of something larger and more important than any individual. When I was your age, he'd told me during one of our camping trips, my father worked in a factory. Good, honest work, but I wanted to do something that mattered more. Something that made a real difference. I'd been 12 then, already talking about following in his footsteps, maybe joining the military after college. He'd smiled and helped me adjust the rifle sight, teaching me to breathe steady before squeezing the trigger. "You've got good instincts, Margaret. Natural discipline. If you decide to serve, you'll serve with honor. Serve with honor." The phrase became my touchstone through high school, through the Naval Academy, through every difficult decision in my military career. When classmates were partying, I was studying. When others looked for shortcuts, I took the harder path that built real confidence. When promotions came with opportunities for corruption or compromise, I held to the principles my father had taught me around those campfires. Even when those principles cost me relationships, cost me easier paths to advancement. Even when other officers questioned why I was so rigid about regulations, so unwilling to bend rules for personal advantage. I'd learned from Jack Richmond that integrity wasn't situational, that true north didn't shift based on convenience. The irony was crushing now, sitting in that Pentagon briefing room with evidence of his betrayal spread across the table. The man who'd shaped my moral compass had lost his own, selling the very principles he'd taught me to value above all else. When had it started to change? I'd been trying to pinpoint the moment during the drive back to my apartment, reviewing 20 years of memories for signs I'd missed. The shift had been gradual, so subtle that I'd attributed it to normal aging, to the stress of building his consulting business after retiring from defense work. Maybe it began when his first consulting contract ended badly, when the Pentagon had chosen a competitor's proposal over his. He'd been bitter about it, talking for months about how military procurement favored established firms over innovative newcomers. How insider connections mattered more than technical competence. 20 years I gave them, he'd said over dinner that night. 20 years of my best work, and they shut me out because I don't have the right friends in the right offices. My mother had tried to soothe his wounded pride, but I'd been uncomfortable with his tone. The military I knew wasn't perfect, but it wasn't the corrupt system he was describing. Contracts went to companies that could deliver results, that had proven track records and security clearances adequate for sensitive work. Maybe you could partner with one of the established firms, I'd suggested. Build relationships gradually instead of trying to break in alone. He'd looked at me like I'd suggested surrendering to the enemy. "You don't understand, Margaret. You're still young, still idealistic. The real world doesn't work the way they taught you at the academy. The real world. He'd started using that phrase more often, usually when dismissing my perspective or explaining why his new business practices were necessary. The real world required compromise, he'd said. Required flexibility in ways that military thinking couldn't accommodate. I'd thought he was talking about normal business challenges, competitive bidding, client management, the usual struggles of entrepreneurship. I hadn't understood that he was rationalizing a fundamental shift in his moral framework, preparing me for changes I couldn't yet see. The new clients had appeared gradually. Men with accents, companies with names that seemed designed to be forgettable. International logistics, he'd called it. Consulting on supply chain management for overseas operations. Nothing obviously problematic, but the details were always vague when I asked questions. Different world from your military work, he'd say. Private sector, commercial contracts. Nothing that would interest you. But it had interested me, precisely because of how evasive he became when I asked about it. The father who'd once shared detailed explanations of communication protocols, who'd trusted me with concepts beyond my childhood understanding, suddenly treated his work like classified information I wasn't cleared to access. The money had been the clearest sign, though I'd refused to see it clearly. The renovations, the car, the expensive restaurants. The casual way he'd started picking up checks for family dinners, as if hundreds of dollars were pocket change. When I'd expressed surprise at his sudden prosperity, he'd laughed it off. Business is good, Margaret. Better than good. Maybe I should have left the defense sector years ago. Left the defense sector. As if his entire career protecting American interests had been a mistake, a waste of time that prevented him from achieving real success. As if the values he'd taught me, service over profit, country over personal gain, were naive concepts he'd outgrown. Now I understood what that success had actually cost. Not just his integrity, but the lives of people who'd trusted American intelligence. Not just his own soul, but the security of the nation he'd once served with honor. The man who'd taught me to find my true north had lost his way completely. And I was going to have to help destroy him to protect everything he'd once taught me to defend. Sleep became impossible after the briefing. I'd driven home through the empty pre-dawn streets of Arlington, climbed the stairs to my apartment, and sat on my couch still wearing my dress uniform. The classified folder's contents played on repeat in my mind: bank transfers, surveillance photos, communication intercepts. Evidence of 18 months of systematic betrayal. By 6 a.m., I'd given up on rest and made coffee, standing at my kitchen window watching the sunrise paint the Potomac gold. Normal people were starting their normal days, jogging, walking dogs, heading to normal jobs where their fathers weren't enemy agents. I envied their ignorance. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Sunday dinner this week? Your father's been asking about you." Of course he had. Probably wondering what intelligence I might share about current operations, what classified details he could extract and sell to his handlers. The thought made me nauseous. How many times had I sat at their dinner table, making casual conversation about my work while he mentally cataloged information for future use? I set the phone aside without responding and pulled out my laptop. If I was going to cooperate with the investigation, I needed to document everything I could remember about my father's questions, his new associates, the changes in his behavior that I'd dismissed as normal aging. The list grew longer than I'd expected. 6 months ago, casual questions about NATO communication protocols. 4 months ago, interest in troop rotation schedules in Eastern Europe. Last month, probing about intelligence sharing agreements with allied nations. All framed as general curiosity, fatherly interest in my career. "I'm proud of what you do, Margaret," he'd said just last week. "Even if I don't always understand the details. These coordination efforts with other countries must be complex." I'd been pleased by what seemed like genuine interest, pleased enough to explain some of the challenges of multinational intelligence operations. Nothing classified, nothing that would violate my oath, but enough to give him context for questions that could extract classified information later. He'd been so good at it. So natural in the way he'd steered conversations, asked follow-up questions that seemed innocuous, but were precisely targeted. A masterclass in intelligence gathering that I'd been too trusting to recognize. The apartment intercom buzzed at 8 a.m. Major Lucy Kim's voice crackled through the speaker, asking if she could come up. Lucy and I had served together in Afghanistan, shared a deployment that forged the kind of trust that transcends normal military relationships. If anyone could help me process this situation, it was her. "You look terrible," she said when I opened the door. "When's the last time you slept?" I poured her coffee and gave her the abbreviated version. Father under investigation. Classified briefing. Life falling apart in real time. She listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as I described the evidence. "Jesus, Margaret. How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure I am." I sat across from her at my small dining table, the same table where I'd done homework as a child while my father helped with math problems, where he'd taught me chess and explained military strategy. "Everyone's going to assume I'm compromised. My career is over." "Your career isn't over," Lucy said firmly. "You've got 15 years of spotless service, 2 combat deployments, and a reputation for integrity that nobody questions. One briefing doesn't erase all of that. But it complicated everything. I'd already received 3 calls from Internal Affairs requesting follow-up interviews. My security clearance would be reviewed, my access to sensitive materials restricted until they determined the extent of any compromise. Every decision I'd made, every report I'd written, would be scrutinized for signs of external influence. The worst part, I told Lucy, is that I helped him. Not intentionally, but I gave him information he used to betray the country. You answered questions from someone you trusted. Someone who raised you to believe in service and honor. That's not your fault. Intellectually, I knew she was right. Emotionally, the guilt was overwhelming. 2 assets were dead because my father had sold their identities. How many of those details had come from casual conversations with me? How much blood was on my hands through ignorance and misplaced trust? My phone rang. General Donovan's office, requesting another meeting that afternoon. More questions, more documentation, more cooperation in building the case against the man who'd shaped my understanding of duty and honor. "I have to help them destroy him," I said after hanging up. "I have to provide evidence that will send my own father to prison." Lucy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You have to protect the country. That's the oath you took, the commitment you made. Everything else is secondary. The country. The abstraction I'd served for 15 years, the ideal my father had taught me to value above personal loyalty. Now that abstraction demanded I choose it over blood, over the man who'd first explained what it meant to serve something larger than yourself." I spent the rest of the morning reviewing personnel files, trying to determine which colleagues might have been compromised by association with me. Anyone I'd worked closely with would face additional scrutiny. Anyone who'd shared classified information with me might find their own careers damaged by proximity to a security breach. The scope of the damage was staggering. Not just the immediate intelligence losses, but the ripple effects through ongoing operations, the erosion of trust between allied services, the years it would take to rebuild networks that had been exposed. My father's betrayal would have consequences long after he was arrested and prosecuted. At noon, I walked to the reflecting pool and sat on a bench facing the Lincoln Memorial. The tourists were out in force, families taking pictures, children running between the columns. Normal people enjoying the freedom that people like me were supposed to protect. Freedom my father had helped foreign enemies undermine. A jogger passed wearing a Navy t-shirt. A veteran, probably, someone who understood the weight of military service. Someone who'd made the same commitment I had, who'd sworn the same oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies. Would he understand why I had to cooperate in prosecuting my own father? Would he see it as duty or betrayal? My phone buzzed with another text from my mother. "Are you all right? You haven't returned my calls." I stared at the message for a long time. My mother, who'd spent 40 years married to a man she'd thought was a patriot. Who'd raised her children to believe in service and sacrifice, who'd sent care packages to my deployments and proudly displayed my commendations on the family mantelpiece. What would this revelation do to her? Another text. "Your father mentioned you seemed distant at the last dinner. He's worried about you." Worried about me. Or worried that I'd started to suspect something, that his intelligence source was becoming unreliable. The manipulation was so complete, so seamless, that it was impossible to separate genuine concern from operational necessity. I turned off my phone and walked back toward the Pentagon. Time for my follow-up interview. Time to provide more evidence against the man who'd taught me the meaning of honor. Time to choose my oath over my blood, my duty over my family. Time to prove that the compass he'd given me still pointed toward true north, even when that direction led me away from him. The decision came in fragments, not as a single moment of moral clarity. 3 days after the initial briefing, Internal Affairs requested copies of all personal communications with my father from the past 2 years. Emails, text messages, phone records. They wanted to map every conversation, every casual exchange that might have yielded intelligence. I printed everything. Hundreds of pages of mundane family correspondence, weekend plans, birthday wishes, and casual check-ins. Reading through them with investigative eyes, I could see the pattern I'd missed before. His questions weren't random curiosity. They followed current events, tracked with operational timelines, probed areas where he knew I had access. "Hope you're staying safe with all the unrest in Syria," he'd texted 6 months ago. "Must be complicated coordinating support from here." I'd responded with general reassurances, mentioning logistical challenges without specifics. Nothing classified, nothing that violated operational security. But enough to confirm ongoing operations, enough to help foreign intelligence services understand American involvement and timing. The guilt was crushing, but it crystallized into something harder: resolve. Every page I handed to Internal Affairs was evidence against him. Every cooperation was a choice to prioritize the oath I'd taken over the family loyalty he'd exploited. "Commander Richmond?" Captain Torres from Internal Affairs looked up from the documents. "These communications show a pattern of what we call intelligence probing. Your father was systematically gathering information about your assignments and responsibilities." "I understand." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "What do you need from me?" "Complete cooperation. Full disclosure of any conversation, any interaction, any detail that might help us understand the scope of compromise." He paused, studying my face. "I know this is difficult. You're not the first officer to discover family involvement in espionage. The important thing is that you're choosing the right side." The right side. As if loyalty were binary, as if the complexity of blood and duty could be reduced to simple mathematics. But maybe that was exactly what it required: the discipline to make hard choices based on principle rather than emotion. That evening, my father called. The first direct contact since the briefing, his voice carrying the casual warmth I'd grown up with. "Margaret, honey, your mother says you haven't been returning her calls. Everything all right?" I stared at my apartment wall, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the man who'd raised me perform concern while probably calculating what intelligence he could extract from our conversation. "I've been busy with work," I said carefully. Of course. Important work, I'm sure. This business with the Russians must be keeping everyone on edge." The Russians. A casual reference that could have been pulled from any newspaper, but I knew better now. He was probing, seeing if I'd revealed details about current operations involving Russian intelligence. The same technique he'd used for 18 months, so subtle I'd never noticed. "I can't discuss work, Dad. You know that." I know. Just worried about you, that's all. These international situations can be stressful for people in your position. People in my position. Intelligence analysts with high-level clearances. People who might have access to information about Russian operations. He was still working, still trying to extract details even after 18 months of systematic betrayal. "I have to go," I said. "Meeting in the morning." "Of course." "Listen, why don't you come by this weekend? Your mother's making that roast you like. We could catch up properly." More probing, more casual questions designed to harvest classified information. More opportunities for him to exploit the trust between father and daughter in service of foreign enemies. "I'll let you know," I said, and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. Concern about my stress levels, invitation to talk if work was getting overwhelming, subtle pressure to maintain our normal contact pattern. The voice of a loving father or a skilled intelligence handler, impossible to distinguish. Major Kim stopped by that evening with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. She'd been fielding questions about me from colleagues, managing the whispers that inevitably followed security investigations. "How bad is it?" I asked. "People are concerned, but they're not questioning your loyalty. Your record speaks for itself." She opened the wine, poured 2 glasses. "The consensus is that you're a victim here, not a perpetrator." Victim. The word stung because it was partially true. I'd been manipulated by someone I trusted, used as an unwitting intelligence source by a man who'd exploited paternal authority to gather classified information. But victim status didn't absolve me of responsibility for the choices I made going forward. "I'm going to testify," I said. "When they bring charges, when this goes to trial, I'm going to testify about everything he asked, everything I told him." Lucy set down her wine glass. "Margaret, that's your father. That's exactly why it matters." I picked up the phone records I'd been reviewing, hundreds of calls and messages documenting 18 months of systematic intelligence gathering. "He taught me that duty comes before family. That integrity isn't negotiable. If I protect him now, I'm betraying everything he claimed to believe in. And if you testify against him, then I'm honoring the principles he taught me, even if he abandoned them himself." The next morning brought another call from General Donovan's office. New evidence had emerged, new communications intercepts that showed the scope of the network. They needed additional details about my father's recent behavior, his travel patterns, his new associates. I provided everything I could remember. The business trips to Eastern Europe that had become more frequent over the past year. The expensive dinners with men whose names he'd never quite explained. The defensive way he'd handled questions about his sudden prosperity. "Commander," General Donovan said during our meeting, "I want you to understand that your cooperation is making a real difference. These details are helping us map the entire network, identify other compromised sources." Other compromised sources. The betrayal was larger than just my father, involved more people I might know or trust. The investigation would expand, more lives would be destroyed, more families would face the choice between loyalty and duty. But the alternative was worse, allowing enemy intelligence services to continue operating with impunity, letting them recruit more sources, compromise more operations, kill more assets. The mathematical calculus of national security demanded that personal loyalty be sacrificed for collective protection. That evening, I drafted a letter to my mother. Not an explanation. Too much was still classified, but a warning that difficult times were coming. That she should prepare for revelations about my father that would challenge everything she thought she knew about their marriage. I wrote 3 drafts and deleted all of them. How do you tell someone that 40 years of their life has been built on lies? That the man they've loved and trusted has been selling their country's secrets to enemies? That their daughter is helping build the case that will destroy him? The phone rang. My father again, his 3rd call in 2 days. I let it ring, listened to his increasingly concerned messages, felt the weight of his manipulation even through recorded words. He knew something was wrong, knew his intelligence source was becoming unreliable. Soon, they'd arrest him. Soon, the careful life he'd built on betrayal would collapse. And I would be there to testify about every detail, every conversation, every moment when he'd chosen enemy gold over American lives. The compass he'd given me still pointed toward true north, even when that direction led through the destruction of everything I'd once called family. The arrest happened at dawn on a Tuesday. I learned about it from the news, watching grainy footage of FBI agents leading my father from his McLean home in handcuffs. The man who'd taught me to stand straight and proud was hunched and defeated, his expensive suit wrinkled from a night in custody. My phone had been ringing since 5 a.m. Reporters, colleagues, distant relatives who'd seen the coverage. I let them all go to voicemail, sitting in my apartment watching the same footage replay on every news channel. Defense contractor charged with espionage. Virginia man sold secrets to Russia. Intelligence network exposed. They didn't mention me, but they didn't need to. Anyone with security clearance would understand the implications. Family members of compromised assets face intensive investigation. My career was now permanently marked by association with treason. My mother called at 8 a.m., sobbing. "Margaret, they won't let me see him. They've frozen all our accounts. I don't understand what's happening." I met her at a coffee shop in Arlington, watching this woman who defined strength throughout my childhood collapse into something fragile and broken. She'd aged 10 years overnight, her hands shaking as she tried to hold her cup steady. "They're saying he gave information to foreign governments," she whispered. "That's impossible. He would never. He loves this country." Loved, past tense. The man she'd married, the man who'd served in Vietnam and raised his children to respect the flag, had loved this country. But that man had been replaced by someone willing to sell American secrets for money, someone who'd used his own daughter as an unwitting intelligence source. "Mom," I said carefully, "the evidence is extensive. Financial records, communications, witness testimony. This isn't a mistake." She stared at me across the small table, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You knew. They told you before the arrest." I couldn't confirm operational details, but my silence was confirmation enough. She realized that I'd been cooperating with the investigation, that I'd helped build the case that destroyed her husband. The look in her eyes shifted from confusion to something approaching betrayal. "How could you?" she whispered. "How could you help them do this to your own father?" The question I'd been dreading, the accusation that cut deeper than any professional consequence. How do you explain to a woman who'd spent 40 years building a life with someone that duty sometimes requires destroying the people you love? "Because 2 people are dead, Mom. Because American operations were compromised. Because he used me to gather intelligence that he sold to our enemies." My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "Because the oath I took means something." She left without another word, walking out of the coffee shop and out of my life with the kind of finality that makes reconciliation impossible. I sat alone at our table, watching through the window as she drove away, understanding that I'd lost both parents in a single moment of choosing principle over family. The next weeks brought a parade of legal proceedings, media coverage, and professional scrutiny that felt endless. My father's lawyer released statements about his mental state, his financial pressures, his manipulation by sophisticated foreign operatives. Character witnesses testified about his military service, his years in defense work, his devotion to his family. None of it mattered. The evidence was overwhelming. 18 months of systematic intelligence gathering, millions in payments from shell companies traced to Russian intelligence, communications with known handlers. The network he'd belonged to had compromised operations across 3 continents. I testified in a closed session, providing details about our conversations that helped prosecutors establish his methods and timeline. Sitting across from government lawyers, I described Christmas dinners where my father had probed for classified information, family gatherings where he'd introduced me to men who turned out to be intelligence operatives. "Commander Richmond," the prosecutor asked, "did you ever suspect your father was gathering intelligence through these conversations?" "No," I admitted. "I trusted him." I thought his questions reflected genuine interest in my career. "When did you realize you'd been manipulated?" "When I saw his name in the classified briefing. When I understood that every casual conversation had been a potential intelligence operation." The defense attorney cross-examined me with surgical precision, trying to establish that I was an unreliable witness motivated by career preservation rather than truth. He suggested that my cooperation was calculated self-interest, that I was sacrificing family loyalty to protect my security clearance. "Commander, isn't it true that your career would be destroyed if you appeared to be protecting a compromised family member?" "My career is already damaged by association," I replied. "I'm testifying because it's the right thing to do, regardless of personal consequences." "The right thing according to whom?" "According to the oath I took to defend the Constitution. According to the principles my father taught me before he abandoned them." The words hung in the courtroom air, a daughter's public repudiation of everything her father had become. In the gallery, I could see my brother Josh, his face torn between loyalty and understanding. My mother wasn't there. She'd stopped speaking to me entirely. During a recess, my father's eyes met mine across the courtroom. The man who'd taught me to shoot, who'd explained military strategy over chess games, who'd shaped my understanding of honor and duty. For a moment, his expression was the one I remembered from childhood, proud, protective, loving. Then his lawyer whispered something in his ear, and his face hardened. When he looked at me again, it was with the cold calculation of an intelligence operative assessing a threat. The father I'd known was gone, replaced entirely by the traitor he'd chosen to become. The sentencing phase brought impact statements from intelligence officials, testimony about damaged operations and compromised assets. 2 families spoke about loved ones killed when their identities were exposed. Widows and children describing lives destroyed by information my father had sold for money. I thought about attending the sentencing, but Major Kim talked me out of it. "You've done your duty," she said. "You don't need to watch him face the consequences." But I did watch, on the news coverage that showed him receiving 25 years in federal prison. The reporter noted that his daughter, a career military officer, had cooperated fully with the investigation. The implication was clear: I'd chosen country over family, duty over blood. My phone rang that evening. Josh's voice, strained and angry. "Are you satisfied now? Are you happy you destroyed him?" "I'm satisfied that justice was served," I replied. "I'm happy that no more American assets will die because of information he provided to our enemies. He's our father, Margaret. He was our father. Then he chose to become something else." I looked out my apartment window at the lights of Washington, the city I'd sworn to defend. I chose to remain his daughter by honoring the principles he taught me, even after he abandoned them. Josh hung up without another word. Another family relationship severed by the choice between loyalty and duty, another consequence of my father's betrayal that extended far beyond his own destruction. But the compass he'd given me still pointed north, even when that direction led through the wreckage of everything I'd once called home. 6 months after my father's sentencing, a letter arrived at my Pentagon office. Federal prison letterhead, his careful handwriting, my name written in the same script that had signed birthday cards and Christmas presents throughout my childhood. I stared at the envelope for 20 minutes before opening it. The paper was thin institutional stock, the kind that reminded you of the sender's circumstances with every touch. His message was brief, written with the precision that had once characterized his military reports. "Margaret, I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to understand that everything I did was to protect this family, to secure your future in ways my government salary never could. The world is more complicated than they taught us at the academy. Love, Dad. Protect this family." The phrase echoed in my mind for days, a justification so fundamentally wrong it revealed how completely he'd lost his moral compass. He'd sold American secrets, caused the deaths of intelligence assets, compromised national security operations, and called it family protection. I drafted 3 responses and deleted them all. What could I say to someone who believed that betraying his country was an act of love? How do you explain to a traitor that real protection comes from integrity, not money? Major Kim found me staring at the letter during lunch break, reading it again as if repeated examination might reveal some hint of the father I'd once known. "You don't have to respond," she said. "You don't owe him anything." But I did owe him something, the truth about what his choices had cost. Not just his own life, but the lives of people who'd trusted American intelligence. Not just his own freedom, but the security of the nation he'd once served. I wrote back, keeping my response as clinical as an after-action report. "Dad, 2 intelligence assets died because you sold their identities. Multiple operations were compromised because you provided classified information to foreign handlers. You didn't protect this family, you destroyed it. The principles you taught me required that I cooperate in your prosecution. I honored the man you used to be by refusing to become what you became. Margaret." I mailed it that afternoon, then immediately regretted the coldness of my tone. This was the man who'd taught me to tie my shoes, who'd helped with homework, who'd sat beside my hospital bed when I broke my arm at 8 years old. The relationship was more complex than my clinical response acknowledged. But complexity didn't change the fundamental equation. He'd chosen money over lives, personal gain over national security. The warmth of childhood memories couldn't erase the blood on his hands or justify the choices he'd made. The investigation's aftermath continued to ripple through my professional life. 3 other military families had been identified as compromised, their relatives unknowingly providing information to the same network. We met informally sometimes, a support group of sorts for people whose family loyalty had been weaponized against national security. Captain Rodriguez's husband had sold Navy deployment schedules. Lieutenant Colonel Wong's brother had provided Air Force communication protocols. Major Stevens' ex-wife had compromised Army logistics operations. All of us had made the same choice: country over blood, oath over family. Do you ever regret it? Captain Rodriguez asked during one of our coffee meetings. Choosing duty over family? The question I'd been asking myself for months. Did I regret cooperating with the investigation that destroyed my father? Did I regret losing my mother, my brother, the family structure that had defined my identity for 35 years? I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that he made choices that forced me to choose. But I don't regret the choice I made. The choice had been validated by subsequent events. The intelligence network my father had belonged to was completely dismantled, preventing additional compromises. 3 ongoing operations were saved by exposure of the leaks. Most importantly, no additional assets had been killed since the arrests. My career survived, though it was forever marked by association with espionage. The Pentagon's investigation had cleared me of wrongdoing, confirming that I'd been an unwitting source rather than a knowing participant. My security clearance was restored, my access to classified materials resumed. But trust, once damaged, takes years to rebuild. Colleagues still watched me carefully during briefings, wondering if family loyalty might override professional obligation. My recommendations carried less weight, my opinions were scrutinized more carefully, my advancement slowed by the shadow of my father's betrayal. General Donovan called me to his office 8 months after the sentencing, offering what felt like a formal assessment of my situation. Commander Richmond, your cooperation during this investigation was exemplary. Your choice to prioritize duty over personal loyalty demonstrated the kind of character we need in military leadership. I waited for the but that I could hear coming. However, your family situation will always be a factor in assignment decisions. Some positions require absolute trust, absolute certainty that personal relationships won't compromise professional judgment. That's not a reflection of your character. It's simply operational reality. Operational reality. My father's betrayal would follow me through the rest of my career, limiting opportunities and shadowing achievements. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because blood relationships create permanent vulnerabilities in the intelligence community. I understand, sir, I said. I knew the consequences when I made my choice. The choice you made was correct, Commander. But correct choices sometimes carry costs that last longer than we'd like. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing personnel files for my next assignment. Counterintelligence work in Germany, important but not career-defining. Good work that would keep me productive while keeping me away from the most sensitive operations. My father had written 3 more letters, each trying to explain his choices in language that revealed how thoroughly he'd rationalized betrayal. I'd stopped responding, understanding that communication only fed his need to justify the unjustifiable. My mother had moved to Florida, selling the McLean house and cutting all ties with the life she'd built in Washington. My brother had taken a job in California, as far from the family scandal as he could get. The Richmond family had been effectively destroyed by one man's decision to prioritize money over loyalty. But the compass he'd given me still worked. It still pointed toward true north, toward the principles that mattered more than personal comfort or family harmony. The direction was harder to follow now, lonelier, but it remained clear. Outside my window, the lights of Washington stretched toward the horizon. The city I'd sworn to defend, the country my father had betrayed, the Constitution I'd chosen over blood when that choice became necessary. His letter remained on my desk unanswered. The final attempt at contact from a man who'd taught me integrity before abandoning it himself. I filed it with the others, evidence of a relationship that had been real once, before duty and betrayal made it impossible. 2 years later, I received my promotion to lieutenant colonel in a ceremony at the Pentagon. The advancement had taken longer than normal, the shadow of my father's case adding complexity to what should have been routine career progression. But it had come, finally, recognition that my service had transcended the circumstances of my birth. General Donovan pinned on my new rank, his words carrying weight beyond the ceremonial script. Lieutenant Colonel Richmond has demonstrated that integrity isn't inherited, it's chosen. Her service exemplifies the principle that duty to country supersedes all personal considerations. The applause was genuine, colleagues who'd watched me navigate the aftermath of family betrayal now acknowledging that I'd emerged with my character intact. Major Kim beamed from the audience, my strongest advocate throughout the long process of rebuilding professional trust. After the ceremony, I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. Not for any specific grave, but to walk among the headstones of people who'd made the ultimate sacrifice for principles larger than themselves. Men and women who'd chosen duty over comfort, service over safety, country over personal interest. My father's choices had cost him everything: freedom, family, the respect he'd once earned through legitimate service. But his betrayal had also clarified something essential about the nature of loyalty. Real loyalty wasn't blood-based or emotion-driven. It was principled commitment to ideals worth defending. The intelligence network he'd belonged to remained dismantled. No additional assets had been killed, no further operations compromised by the leaks he'd facilitated. His arrest had disrupted a systematic threat to national security, saving lives in ways that would never make headlines or earn public recognition. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Josh stood outside my apartment door, looking older than his 32 years, wearing the expression of someone carrying unbearable weight. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat in my living room, the silence stretching between us like the years of separation that had followed our father's arrest. He'd moved to San Francisco, taken a tech job, built a life as far from the family scandal as geography would allow. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began finally. "About choosing to honor who he used to be instead of protecting who he became." I waited, understanding that this conversation had taken him 2 years to initiate. "I visited him last month. First time since the sentencing." Josh's hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white with tension. "He's different. Smaller somehow. But he still believes he was protecting us, still thinks the money justified everything." "And what do you think?" "I think you were right." The admission seemed to cost him physical effort. "I think the man who raised us would have been ashamed of what he became. And I think he would have wanted his children to choose duty over loyalty to his mistakes." The reconciliation was tentative, built on shared grief for the father we'd lost long before his arrest. Josh couldn't bring himself to cut contact entirely, but he understood now why I'd made the choice that seemed impossible 2 years ago. "Mom won't see it that way," he said. "She still believes you betrayed the family." "I know." The pain of that loss had faded to a manageable ache, but it remained permanent. "I chose to be the daughter he raised me to be, even when that meant standing against who he'd become." My phone buzzed with a message from General Donovan's office. "New assignment details for my next posting. Counterintelligence work in Eastern Europe, important and sensitive." The kind of assignment that indicated trust had been rebuilt, that my career was moving forward despite the circumstances of my family history. The work would be dangerous, complex, vital to national security. Exactly the kind of service my father had once prepared me for, back when he believed in principles over profit. The irony was sharp. His betrayal had led to my strongest professional validation. That night, I wrote him one final letter. Not angry anymore, not clinical, but honest in ways that earlier communication hadn't allowed. "Dad, you taught me that integrity isn't situational, that duty matters more than comfort, that some principles are worth any sacrifice. When you abandoned those beliefs, I had to choose between loyalty to you and loyalty to what you taught me to value. I chose your teachings over your choices. I became the person you raised me to be, even when that meant standing against the person you became. Your compass still points north, even when following that direction led me away from you. Margaret." I mailed it the next morning, understanding that it would be my last communication with the man who'd shaped my moral framework before violating everything he'd taught me to respect. 3 months later, beginning my assignment in Prague, I received word that he died in federal prison. Heart attack, sudden and final. The news came through official channels. Josh had listed me as next of kin for notification purposes, though we both knew I wouldn't attend any service. I felt sadness, but not grief. The man I'd grieved for had died years earlier when he made his first choice to sell American secrets for money. What died in prison was just the shell, the physical reminder of betrayal that had destroyed our family and ended his own life in practical terms long before his heart stopped beating. My mother didn't contact me about his death. Josh handled the arrangements, a small service attended by the few people who remembered the man he'd been before becoming the traitor he chose to be. I sent flowers with a simple card, for the father who taught me honor. That evening, I stood on my Prague apartment balcony, looking out over a city where American intelligence operations helped maintain the security of democratic allies. Work that mattered, principles that transcended personal loyalty, duty that honored the best of what my father had once believed. His compass had pointed north for 60 years before he broke it. But the direction remained true, and I'd learned to navigate by the stars he'd taught me to recognize before he lost his way. The man who'd betrayed his country was dead. The principles he'd taught me to defend lived on, stronger for having survived his test. In the distance, Prague Castle glowed against the night sky, ancient and permanent. Like duty. Like honor. Like the commitment to something larger than family, larger than comfort, larger than the easy choices that destroy everything they claim to protect. I went inside to review intelligence briefings for tomorrow's meetings. There was work to do. 5 years after my father's death, I found myself standing in the Pentagon briefing room where it had all begun. Same fluorescent lights, same polished conference table, same weight of classified responsibility. But this time, I was the one holding the folder. Colonel Margaret Richmond now, the promotion having come 18 months earlier with an assignment to head counterintelligence operations for Eastern Europe. The shadow of my father's betrayal had never fully disappeared, but it had transformed from liability into strange credential, proof that I understood the personal cost of choosing country over family. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Williams said, sliding another file across the table. "We've identified the source." I opened the folder to reveal a photograph of Captain David Chin, a communications specialist with top-secret clearance and access to NATO coordination protocols. Financial records showed payments from shell companies, communication intercepts revealed contact with Chinese intelligence handlers, surveillance photos documented meetings with known operatives. The same pattern my father had followed. The same progression from financial pressure to foreign recruitment to systematic betrayal of American interests. The same choice between easy money and difficult integrity. "Family situation?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would complicate everything. "Divorced, 2 teenage children. Ex-wife has cancer, medical bills exceeding his military salary. Children attend private school he can barely afford." Lieutenant Williams paused. Classic vulnerability profile. Classic indeed. Financial pressure, family obligations, the gradual rationalization that selling secrets was necessary to protect loved ones. The same justifications my father had used, the same logic that transforms patriots into traitors one compromise at a time. Current operations affected? 3 NATO exercises compromised. 2 intelligence sharing agreements potentially exposed. 1 asset in Beijing has gone silent, we assume blown. 1 asset in Beijing. Someone who'd trusted American intelligence, who'd risked everything to provide information about Chinese military capabilities. Now likely dead or in Chinese custody because Captain Chen had chosen his family's financial comfort over operational security. I thought about my father's letter, his insistence that betrayal was really protection, that selling secrets was an act of love. The logic seemed absurd until you faced a child's medical bills, until private school tuition threatened to destroy your family's future, until foreign handlers offered solutions that seemed victimless. Recommendations? I asked my team. Major Rodriguez, my deputy, had been part of the original investigation into my father's network. She understood the complexity of family-based compromise better than anyone. Immediate arrest, full cooperation from family members, complete damage assessment. Her tone was professional, clinical. Standard protocol for this level of breach. Standard protocol. Which would destroy Captain Chen's family the same way my father's arrest had destroyed mine. His children would lose their father to federal prison, Their mother would face medical bankruptcy without his income. Their comfortable life would collapse into poverty and shame. The mathematics of national security demanded his arrest and prosecution. American lives had been put at risk, Allied intelligence services compromised, ongoing operations exposed. Personal circumstances couldn't justify continued betrayal, couldn't excuse the choice to prioritize family welfare over national security. But I understood now, in ways I couldn't have 5 years ago, why people made those choices. Why love became justification for betrayal, why protection of family seemed more important than abstract concepts like duty and honor. "Schedule the arrest for tomorrow morning," I said. "Full surveillance team, complete operational security. I want his communications monitored until custody to prevent any final intelligence transmission." "Yes, ma'am." Major Rodriguez made notes on her tablet. "Will you be observing?" The question carried weight beyond operational necessity. Would I watch another family destroyed by the same choices that had destroyed mine? Would I subject myself to seeing Captain Chen's face when he realized his world was ending? "I'll be there," I said. "This is my operation." That evening, I called Josh. We'd rebuilt something resembling a relationship over the years, though it remained careful, tentative, marked by the shared trauma of our father's betrayal. He'd married, started a family, built a life deliberately separate from our childhood associations with military service. "How's work?" he asked, the casual question carrying undertones we both recognized. My work involved secrets he couldn't know, decisions that affected lives in ways I couldn't explain. "Challenging," I said. "How are the kids?" We talked about his daughters, 5 and 7 years old, innocent of the complexities that had shaped our family. They knew their grandfather had been in trouble before they were born, but the specifics remained protected by their parents' careful silence. "Do you ever think about what we'd be like if things had been different?" Josh asked. "If Dad had made different choices?" The question I'd stopped asking myself years ago, understanding that speculation about alternate histories was less productive than acceptance of actual consequences. Our father had made his choices, we'd made ours, and the results were permanent regardless of what might have been. Sometimes, I admitted. But we can't change the past. We can only choose how to respond to what actually happened. After hanging up, I reviewed Captain Chen's file again, studying the progression from financial pressure to foreign recruitment. The pattern was so familiar it could have been my father's story: gradual compromise, rationalized betrayal, systematic exploitation of access and trust. His arrest went smoothly. FBI agents took him into custody at his Arlington home, the same neighborhood where my father had been arrested 5 years earlier. Same dawn timing, same careful operational security, same media attention that would follow within hours. I watched from a surveillance vehicle as they led him away in handcuffs, his teenage children visible through the front window, their faces pressed against glass as their world collapsed in real time. The same expression of confused terror I'd seen in my own reflection during those first days after my father's arrest. His ex-wife emerged from the house, still in a bathrobe, trying to shield their children from neighbors and early commuters who'd stopped to watch the spectacle. A woman facing cancer treatment and single parenthood and financial ruin, all because her ex-husband had chosen immediate solutions over long-term consequences. "Clean arrest," Major Rodriguez reported through my earpiece. "No resistance, full cooperation." Full cooperation. The same phrase used to describe my own response to my father's investigation, the clinical terminology that reduced family destruction to operational efficiency. Captain Chen would face the same choice I had: cooperate with the investigation or protect family loyalty at the cost of additional charges. I already knew which choice he'd make. The evidence was overwhelming, the consequences unavoidable, the mathematics of prosecution too clear for successful resistance. He'd cooperate because cooperation offered the only path toward eventual reunion with his family. Back at the Pentagon, I briefed General Morrison on the arrest and began coordinating damage assessment with Allied intelligence services. The same process I'd observed from the other side during my father's case, the same methodical evaluation of compromise and consequences. "Excellent work, Colonel Richmond," General Morrison said. Your experience with family-based espionage cases brings valuable perspective to these investigations. Valuable perspective. The euphemistic way of acknowledging that my father's betrayal had become professional qualification, that personal trauma had been transformed into operational advantage. I understood how family loyalty could be weaponized, how love could become justification for treason, how good people could make terrible choices. That understanding made me better at my job, more effective at preventing and prosecuting intelligence breaches. But it came at the cost of never being able to see family relationships as innocent, never being able to trust that love alone guaranteed loyalty to larger principles. The compass my father had given me still pointed north, but the terrain had become more complex. True north remained constant, but the path required navigation through landscapes of compromise and consequence that he'd never prepared me to traverse. Captain Chen's children would grow up the way Josh and I had, marked by family betrayal, shaped by the choice between loyalty and duty. Maybe they'd choose differently than we had. Maybe they'd find ways to maintain family connections while honoring larger obligations. Or maybe they'd learn what we'd learned, that some choices are permanent, that integrity isn't negotiable, that duty sometimes requires standing against the people you love most. The work continued. There were always more cases, more betrayals, more families destroyed by the choice between easy money and difficult honor. My father's compass kept pointing north, even when that direction led through the wreckage of other people's families. Even when following that direction meant becoming the person who destroyed them. Here's where I'll leave it for now. I chose my oath over blood, and I'm still living with the cost and the clarity. If this hit you, tap like, subscribe for more true boundary stories, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment. Questions for you. Have you ever had to choose between duty and family? What did you do? If someone you love crossed a line, would you report them or try to fix it quietly? Where's your non-negotiable boundary right now? Do you believe forgiveness is possible without reconciliation? What would you tell your past self before your 4:30 a.m. call?